I'm Dan Dressler from Tucker Snowcat. What I'm going to show you today is the 2000 XL. What we're looking at is what we call the utility version. We have one that's a little bit lighter weight, but we're going to talk about the utility version today. So here's the machine. First thing I'm going to talk about is the drivetrain. So we've got a 130 horsepower Cummins engine, Tier 4 final, running through Allison automatic transmission, and then into a transfer case, and then by drive lines out to the differentials, Dana differentials. The differentials are, this is automotive type stuff. So the differentials then are turning axles instead of tires. And what we're seeing here is that these are turning the sprockets. So instead of wheels on a truck, they're turning the sprockets. The sprockets then are turning the tracks. The differentials themselves, like say the Dana 60 differentials, have E-lockers in them, so that with a button in the dash, you can convert to positive traction, either take it in or go out. Again, keep thinking of like a pickup truck. Okay, operation of the machine. And before I get going, there's one thing that I'd left out on gauges. If your vehicle has a transfer case cooler, you're going to see a switch like this, and it's usually going to be mounted somewhere towards the end of these rows. And so that's that switch we'd like you to turn on after a couple of minutes of warm-up to keep that transfer case cool. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about are stickers. We've got 4 groups of stickers. So you're going to see red ones for danger, telling you to wear your seat belts, talking about the ROPS cab, things to keep your hands clear of. You'll see that back by the fan. Orange are going to be the warning stickers. Like this particular one is talking about the backup alarm. They'll also talk about that the tracks can be slippery when they're wet. And then yellow, you're not seeing one here, but it's caution. So that'll probably be something like caution, hot around the exhaust. And then blue, which makes up most of them, and those are notices. Operation of the machine, how to check the oil, specific fluids, and maybe things that are placed that might be a little bit hard to find. They'll let you know where they are. So we've always printed a checklist, an inspect daily list. You'll see that in this case we've got it down on the bottom of the windshield, and those are things you really should be checking before you take off. Check your engine oil, make sure it's got fuel, make sure the lights work, the heaters work. If most of you are working with groups where you've got mechanics taking care of the vehicles, you want to just check with them before you leave the yard with it to make sure that everything is in good condition. And then, as far as starting the machine, we use a grid heater, so you don't use any starting fluid with the machine. Grid heater looks like a waffle iron on the intake. So first thing, you're going to turn the key on, and the dash is going to go through a couple of screens, and pretty quickly here we're going to see a show of the gauges. If it's cold enough outside, the grid heater would be on automatically. This is making sure that you are recognizing that you're supposed to be wearing your seat belts. Push OK. So you would see a yellow curly Q up here on the top letting you know that that grid heater is on. Once it goes off, then you turn the machine on. If it's very cold outside and it goes off and you turn it back on, then or you attempt to start it, and if it doesn't start, then stop, go back, let it come on again. It needs enough of that warm air for it to start. So we'll start it up, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip it to high idle. All right, and we're going to let it do its warm up. We'll go ahead and turn on our lights, both sets of headlights, the rotating beacon, turn on those outside mirrors. And then we're going to put on our seatbelt. The seat belts come out slow and steady. If you pull on them quick, they're going to lock up. So they come out slow and steady. Hook up that seat belt. Once the machine is warmed up, again, it'd be nice if it could be idling for 10, maybe 15 minutes if the weather's really cold. So let's assume now it's warmed up and we're getting ready to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to turn off high idle. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to raise the blade, because you don't want to take off with the blade now. Happens all the time. So get that blade up, out of the way. With our high idle off, now our RPMs are down below 100, and we're going to want to shift it into the selected gear, whether it's reverse or drive. We're going to have our foot on the service brake, and then we're going to put it into drive. You can tell when it goes in, two things. You can feel it, and then you'll also be able to see on the dash. There's telling us it's in first, or if we put it in reverse, of course we're going to hear the backup alarm, but it's also going to tell you that it's in reverse. So remember on your gear selector here that there is no park. Allison doesn't want us to have the park detent in there, so it won't get broken off if we're parking on a steep slope. So when you come to a stop, you know, we're used to this being a regular vehicle, and you put it in park. You don't want to do that. It's going to reverse. So you just put it into neutral. Whether you're stopping to talk to somebody on the trail or shutting down or whatever, put it neutral. That'll take the tension off of trying to push the machine forward. So put it neutral, put your blade down. So any vehicle that's got a blade, you always want to put that blade down before you go out. Set your brake, and then you can go ahead and turn it off. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the blade. I'll lift it back up. This particular one is what we call a six-way U-blade. U being the semi-U, so it's got those wings on the end that are permanently pushed towards the center. So this has up and down, and it has tilt, not angle, but tilt, left and right, and then roll. Now your functions of up and down and tilting left and right cannot be done without squeezing the paddle, which I may have mentioned earlier. This paddle has to be squeezed before you move your joystick as a safety feature. That way, if you I accidentally hit it, it's not going to do something. Now the roll functions on the top, the paddle doesn't need to be squeezed, and you can just simply move it back and forth. So I'm going to turn it off now just to cut down the noise. One thing I'm going to show you first. The main reason for this blade is to cut a drift. Cut through a drift, so you're not trying to go sideways or across the slope. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to take snow away from the high side and get it underneath the track on the low side. Let's say the high side is on mine. So we're going to tip the blade in, we're going to roll it forward a little bit, and we're going to be cutting snow out, and it'll go down in front of this part of the blade. The only thing this blade won't do is not going to move snow left to right or right to left on the flat. Any place else, it's going to actually move that snow to the lowest place. It catches it on the semi-U and throws it towards the center. If there's any slope at all, it's always going to go to the low part. So the main thing to remember, you're cutting out snow from the high and putting down below, and that'll raise up that side of the machine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this back down now. And turn this off. So on the operation of the machine, I kind of went forward on the blade there, but on the operation of the machine, the next thing to do once you've started it up, warmed it up, raised the blade, and you're getting ready to go, remember that you need to be moving before you turn the tracks. This has so much contact with the ground, and it's hydraulically operated to turn those fifth wheel plates with the tracks on there. So you need to be moving a little bit forward or back to be, just helps cut down the tension on the steering system. Okay, so that's the blade, that's the steering. The last thing would be the, next to last thing would be the lockers. The lockers, there's a switch on the dash here for the lockers. Those are the electric lockers. It's going to lock up like positive track in a truck. It's going to lock up both the front and the back. There'll be a symbol on the dash to tell you when it's locked up, and there'll be a warning beeper over here going off the whole time it's in. Two basic operations, two basic applications for the locker. One would be obviously if it seems like you're stuck. This would be like the same thing as a four-wheel drive pickup, say out in the sand, and you're stuck. One wheel in the front is going to be turning, one wheel in the back is going to be turning. So when you put it in positive lock, all four of those are going to be turning. So if you get into a situation where you don't have enough traction, put in the lockers and they will get you out of that pinch. The reason for the beeping is that they're not designed to be engaged all the time. It's going to make it tougher for you to steer. So it's just to get you through that spot. The other one would be if you're climbing up something steep enough and you're starting to spin a little bit and you're not moving forward, slow down, put it in, put the lockers in. You don't have to have it neutral, but just your foot off the accelerator, engage the lockers, and then slowly start moving forward. Once you're up over the top or the slope drops off, go ahead and take the lockers back out. The last thing would be if you have one of the newer machines that's Tier 4 final that's burning deaf. Just like in the trucks, every once in a while it's going to be cleaning the exhaust, so it's going to run up to run the exhaust back behind you. You're not going to notice in the normal operation of the machine. However, that exhaust temperature is pretty high. So if it's wanting to do it at the same time you're backing into the shop or around a group of people, then you can stop that by pushing the button that says inhibit the regen. Okay, so then it's going to keep, and you flip that, and it'll go out of that mode and it'll just be normal. And then once you're in the clear, then you can go ahead and hit manual and it will go back and run that. Because if the problem would be if you keep, every time it regens, if you keep telling it by the switch, no, once it gets up to a certain point, then it's going to depower the machine, and then you'll have to get a hold of a tech. So again, remember, warm up the machine, wear your seat belt, turn your switches on, get that blade up, then move forward and don't start turning unless you're moving. Okay, if you got any questions, call us. Thank you. Okay, so this 2000 XL, 4-passenger, 4-person cab, ROPS, 2 bucket seats in the front, bench seat in the rear. They're seat belts for 4, even though that back seat looks like it would hold 5. It's just seat belts for 4 because of the ROPS certification. So we've got the cab, separate compartment for the engine. So the cab comes with, the mirrors, the lights, the windshield wipers, all the basic necessities. On the front of the machine here, you see a receiver. Comes with a receiver on the front and the back, and it's winch ready. So the electrical comes out there for your winch. We'll see the winch is currently mounted on the back. We've got a 6-way blade, a U-blade. So this goes up and down, and it tilts left, tilts right, and it rolls. What it doesn't do is angle. But with the U-blade, it will kick that snow because it's hitting it here. It's going to send it that way. It hits that corner, it's going to send it this way. The blade on this lightweight cat is designed for cutting into a road that's blown into a drift. It's not made for clearing the parking lot. It's not a groomer. Okay, so on the back then, separate compartment for the engine. This has that Cummins 130 horsepower engine in it. Dipstick for your oil, dipstick for the transmission, and then sight glasses for the hydraulic tank. And then on here you can see with this decal we show you all of the spots to grease and all of the places that hold oil, the differentials, the engine, the transfer case, and then a basic service guide. All of this stuff is quite a bit more detail inside the manual. So electronic engine, electronic transmission. The hydraulics on this machine do two things. They help the steering, they control the steering, and then they control the blade. They don't control the drive of the unit itself. Fuel tank is underneath the bed, and it holds 30 gallons. This particular unit is Tier 4 final, so it does burn DEF. And so your DEF tank is right here, holds about 5 gallons, and there is a meter on the gauge up front that tells you how much is in there all the time. This particular model has the ladder rack with a wraparound aluminum deck on it, which is a real nice feature. The only thing is it does add weight to the machine, and so we're going to limit how much cargo you put on this whole back end to 500 pounds. If it doesn't have that, if it just has a regular 79 by 35 inch deck, you could hold more like 800 pounds. Here you'll also see that winch has that receiver on the back just like up front, and the 12,500 pound Warn winch is mounted on the back. And around this side of the engine compartment, there are a few more things. This is your sight glass for the coolant. Here's your dry air filter, dry element air filter. Here's your battery master switch. There's a container in there to catch the oil out of the breather from the transfer case. As that transfer case is going around and around, it's throwing oil up towards the breather, so that it comes up here and it catches that oil and lets it drain back down instead of running off the transfer case itself. Obviously, your starters down here. You've got your alternator here. Pretty good access. You've got these are the fuses for your front and rear e-lockers. So that's the engine compartment. On top, you're gonna see a Turbo 3 pre-cleaner. This helps. It takes a lot of air to run these new engines, and it's taking air from the outside. And so if you get into those conditions where you've got real light snow and it's kind of flying around, it could plug up your air cleaner, so this will keep that from happening. This is what we call the halo rack around the engine compartment. That's a good place to put bulky things that aren't heavy. No more than 200 pounds on that. Okay, now we're gonna get in the vehicle. The front seats adjust forward and back. There's a slide handle underneath, and so you can get a little bit of forward and back on them. Get in. This particular one has a tilt steering wheel, so I can move that. The first thing to do is get a seatbelt on. The seatbelts come out slow and steady. If you pull on them too quick, they'll lock up. So get that seatbelt on, and always wear their seatbelt when you're in the vehicle. Okay, so the first thing here is to look at what we've got. We've got an emergency brake or a parking brake. got a gear selector, and notice there's no park detent in it. Blade control, your instrument cluster. You got an accelerator and a brake pedal. Again, like a truck. So we're gonna turn the key on. If it's really cold outside, the grid heater will heat up the intake air. So you never want to use ether with this. It'll blow the top off the engine. If it's cold enough, it would come on and you would see a little yellow curlicue up on the top. It's warm enough now so it's not coming on. And so then we would start up. And so we've got our instrument cluster here that's going to tell us everything, complete with your DEF fluid, your DEF percentage of full. So right now it's 76% full. And so you've got a couple of things that you can play with on this dash. Those two buttons we don't have doing anything, which is good. And here is more information about the engine, just in a different format instead of a gauge. Go back to the gauge. Over here, you can turn on the night vision, which is good because it's too bright at night. Turn it back. If you had a rear view camera, this other switch would bring that up to the rear view camera. So we've been looking at the gauge stuff. Then engine diagnostics. This is going to show any store codes that are in the engine. User settings. So here we can adjust the background of the display itself for both night and day. And you can change your language and units of measure from US standard to metric. Languages, French, German, Spanish, Dutch, Italian. So you can scroll through things. You select one and then and make your changes. Utilities, system settings. This is where you would change things that you would talk to us about. Trip reset. So if you wanted to do your mileage, figure out what your mileage is, that's how you do that. Okay, and then on let's talk about some basic things first. If you're going to drive and you don't have any warnings on the gauge, the first thing you're going to do is lift that blade up so you don't take off with the blade down. But I'll back up a little bit. To start the machine, you're going to make sure that your heater light is off, that it starts. Once it starts, and you should probably let it warm up for 15 minutes. Again, like a diesel truck. Now to put it into gear, it's not going to let it go into gear if three things. If your parking brake is on, which it is, and you've got a symbol on the dash, that parking brake, or if you're high idle, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you're high idle, if your idle is over 1,000 RPM and high idle brings it up to 1,100, it will not go into gear. You can move this, but you're going to get a sign, a message there telling you transmission is not going into gear. So you go back to neutral, take off high idle. And then the other thing is your foot needs to be on the service brake. So all three of those things have to be true to be able to put it into gear or to change from drive to reverse. Parking brake, RPM, and foot on the service brake. On the dash, what we have here is we have a switch for high idle. Cummins suggests that anytime you're going to be sitting for more than 5 minutes at an idle, flip it to high idle. Again, that's going to be better for the engine. But again, it's not going to let you put it into gear. So just remember that when you go to take off. So it's just more efficient for the engine. Down below you have a overdrive lockout. That will keep it from, because it's a 4-speed transmission with overdrive, and it's going to be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to keep it from going into overdrive or fifth. The reason you do that would be if you're on a drive with a little bit of an incline where it's pretty smooth and packed, and it's going from fourth to overdrive and then coming back to fourth and going to overdrive, doing that searching. Flipping that switch will just keep it from going into overdrive, so it'll quit doing the searching. Got your windshield wiper control. So you've got fast and slow and then varied. You can also push this once and you'll get 3 swipes. That's good because it's the only switch like that on the dash. So if you're in a situation where it's drizzling a little bit, but you really don't want to keep your eye off of where you are, you can reach down and find that and push it. Across the top then you've got 2 sets of lights on the top. Out front you have driving lights and floodlights. That's what those switches are. You have your rotating beacon. You've got your heated mirrors. You've got, in the case of this machine, where you have side work lights above the door outside, those turns those off and on. And then you can manually turn on your backup lights. Over here, then you've got the switch that turns those e-lockers I was talking about either off or on. And you can engage and disengage those while you're moving. We would just say to have your foot off the power. And then you've got a cab fan, which is this extra fan up here. You can with a switch you can you can turn on the interior door light. That's automatically going to come on. It's just hooked to the driver's door. And then over here you've got your inhibit for the regen and manual for the regen. Since this is a Tier 4 final, it does do a regen where it's burning that stuff out of the exhaust. So driving this machine, again, like the pickups with them in it, you really don't tell any difference. It's not going to interrupt anything. The reason that you would want to interrupt it is if it was getting ready to do it, it blows out hot exhaust. So if you're getting ready to do it while it's when you're going to be backing into a shop, you probably don't want to do it inside the shop. So that's when you would shut it off. And it's going to build up. And so then when you go out next, you would hit manual and let it go ahead and do its regen. And then up above here is the cab fan speed. Your cab fan is coolant. Your cab heater is a coolant heater. You adjust the heat on this knob, and then this is your 3-speed fan. This is your controller, your joystick for the blade. So it has a safety in it, a paddle on the front that you have to squeeze. You squeeze the paddle, and then you're going to do up, down, tilt right, tilt left. On the top, which you don't have to have the paddle squeeze for, up on top would be your roll, to roll the blade forward, roll it back. Then we've got the gear selector. So again, it's an Allison transmission. It doesn't have a park. The reason for that is so that we don't break the park detent off, because we're parked on something a lot steeper than a wheeled vehicle will be. At the bottom, you'll notice a little button that says brake overdrive. You remember I said that you have to have your foot on the service brake to be able to put it into gear. So when you step on that service brake, it's sensing a control device down below. If something happens to that control device, then you wouldn't be able to put it into gear. But pushing this button, then you can make it go into gear. You can override that. And again, your parking or emergency brake, all the way on, all the way off. And again, there'll be a signal on there for it. Cup holders. There's a 12-volt power port here. This particular unit has a spotlight up on top. These are the controls for the spotlight, for the direction and the speed.